Hello, how you doing? My name is Tim Warner. I'd like to welcome you to this lesson called How to Design an E-Learning Course. This is my inaugural or first episode, and I'm calling this Overview. I have two learning goals for this lesson. First, I'm going to describe how I approach instructional design in an e-learning context. Number two, I want to lay the foundation for future lessons. Let me know in the comments if you find this introductory overview to be useful, because I'm more than happy to continue and give you a particular example. We'll work through developing a course from soup to nuts. I've been a professional trainer for over 20 years now. I've made, I don't know how many, hundreds of e-learning courses that run all around the world. I've had a very fruitful and wonderful career. And what I want to do is kind of turn the tables here and share some of my experience and proven practices with you so that you can benefit from them if you're charged with developing an electronic learning or e-learning course. Let me share with you my 10-step development process. Now, this process can't be found in any book. This is the result of my own 20-plus years as a technical trainer. First, we've got the brainstorm step, and I'm going to go through each of these steps or phases in more detail subsequently. I'm just rolling them all up in a summary for you right here. Phase 2 would be blueprint. 3 is research. 4 is storyboard. 5 is record. Phase 6 I call edit stage A. My post-production editing I break into 2 stages, stage A and stage B. Phase 8 is produce. Phase 9 is monitor, and phase 10 is revise. What do I mean by an e-learning course? I'm talking about using screencast video, exactly what I'm doing here in this lesson, where I use the screencast software to record the contents of my computer screen, and I use my microphone to do a voiceover track. This pre-recorded lesson I can publish just about anywhere. Obviously, this particular one I'm hosting on YouTube. In my full-time role at Pluralsight, the e-learning training I develop for them gets hosted in their library, accessible by paid subscribers. Now then, as I mentioned, I want to spend the rest of our time together today with my walking you through each of my 10 phases of e-learning course design. What do I mean by brainstorm? Well, each of these phases involves me answering specific questions. Some of the most important questions initially is, what is the subject under consideration? Want to be careful not to be too broad, and too granular is generally speaking not a problem, because in my field, information technology, I'm looking at solution development. What is the specific business problem that we're solving? I work in IT certification, and there it's pretty clear. I may be developing a course to help people clear such and so an IT certification. In my YouTube channel, sometimes I run into industry issues that are head scratchers, and once I have a solution, I'm happy to post a video here on my YouTube channel walking viewers through that particular solution to save them some time and effort. Who is the audience? It's important that I have an idea of who I'm training and what I'm assuming is their skill set. Now, being a technical trainer, I'm accustomed to teaching to a wide variety of backgrounds. I, generally speaking, expect that I'm going to have beginner, intermediate, and advanced learners in my classes, even if my classes are advertised explicitly as beginner, intermediate, or advanced. That's just part of the life of the technical trainer. But I need to have some kind of idea in my head, as granularly as I can get it, of who I'm actually teaching. What is the delivery type? Now, I do all sorts of teaching. I do live in-person classroom training. Since the pandemic, my live training is pretty much all online, but it's the same general idea. And then, of course, traditional e-learning, as I see it anyway, is the pre-recorded computer-based training, or CBT courseware. But each of those delivery types is going to have its own possibilities. For example, if I'm preparing to give a presentation live to a technology user group, I'm going to approach that differently than, say, when I make a Pluralsight course. The output of this brainstorm, generally speaking, and I'm just speaking for myself, is going to be some notes. I keep my notes in OneNote. So I'll have a OneNote notebook with some pages in there for my projects, and I may just have some ideas that haven't formulated into an actual course yet. It's great to be able to capture all of these ideas when I'm inspired, get them written down somewhere, such that I can come back to them and maybe decide next week or next month, this course idea here would be a great fit for my YouTube channel. Or this course idea over there I think would be great for a Pluralsight. I'm going to pitch this to my editor. So brainstorming and capturing these ideas, no matter how insignificant I think they are, is critical. Now, if I've already been contracted to do training, then the brainstorm is much more focused. And that brainstorming output feeds directly into phase 2, which is the blueprinting process. This is where I'm answering questions like, okay, I know I'm going to do an e-learning course on this topic. I've identified my audience and their skill level. I know what the delivery type is. What constraints do I have? Do I have a hard production deadline that I'm going up against? Is the company that I'm making or the party that I'm making the training for requiring a specific course length, specific focus? Don't mention our competitors, these kind of constraints. It's critical during this discovery phase that I work with the client and figure out what their expectations are so I can meet and exceed them. And I know what the guardrails are so I can avoid those. I'm a huge proponent of storytelling. I don't know if you're familiar with my training, if you would call it traditional storytelling, probably not. But I strongly feel that good e-learning training has an overarching theme or storyline. And I'm going to come back to that point again and again, not just in this video, but any supplemental ones that I do afterwards. What is the theme here? We know what the business problem is that we're looking to solve. We know who the audience is. How am I going to transmit this lesson in as cohesive, understandable, thematic way possible? The output of the blueprint now takes me into the research phase. And this is going to depend upon what kind of learner you are. If you're familiar with different learning styles, do you prefer to read? Do you prefer to listen? Do you prefer to interact? I am a multimodal learner, so I will generally turn on the old fire hose and look at all sorts of different content types, written, online, written print, video, audio, working through hands-on labs. And just as importantly for me, I interview practitioners. For example, at Pluralsight, I was assigned a course on SAP, which is a product family I didn't have too much experience with prior to being assigned that course. And here I am needing to be an expert in that subject matter. How can I deliver value? Well, first, let me say that if I wasn't confident I would be able to skill up fast and deliver good industry-leading value, I would tell my editor that. It's critical that I have enough self-awareness, integrity, and self-honesty that if I'm unable to do something, I will tell the appropriate party rather than stay silent and fail. That's kind of a no-go for me ethically. But anyway, I was realizing, okay, I know half of this. I know how Azure works. I just need to get smart on SAP and how SAP integrates with Azure. So I turned not only to every content type I could, but I also wound up reaching out through my various professional networking channels. And I have another video here in my YouTube library on professional networking, at least one. I found people that work with SAP on Azure, and I wanted to talk to them, and I did talk to them to get their experience and leverage that experience in my own course. How long the research phase is going to take you depends entirely on the complexity of the subject matter and how your expertise is already set at that time, all right? Once I've completed my preliminary research, I'm now ready to do my storyboarding, phase 4. And this means 9 times out of 10, I'm going to work in PowerPoint and build out a slide deck. Now, I tend to be a demonstration-based instructor. And when you're teaching IT, I find that having a healthy balance, I'd say 50-50 between lecture and demo, is a good starting point. And by developing the slide deck, am I also developing a talk track? No, I don't. I never work with a transcript. I have plenty of trainer colleagues who do work out word by word what their audio track is going to be, but I find that that reduces or eliminates my spontaneity. I would rather be spontaneous and have an immediacy and effectiveness to my training, and perhaps miss or overlook a point than map out every single word and get every bullet point I wanted to transmit, but coming across in a scripted, artificial way. And I find as a learner, that's kind of a recipe for boring the learner, but your mileage may vary. I don't judge you if you do want to work out a transcript. But I'm going to create a slide deck that initially is schematic. Sometimes I find that mind mapping is a great way to lay out the storyline of my course. If the course is going to be just a single slide deck, that's easier. In Pluralsight, I normally have several modules that comprise a course. So each module or lesson is going to have its own slide deck. So I'm often finding before I get into PowerPoint, it's best for me to use a tool like I use Mindomo for my mind mapping to lay out the storyline and to make sure I have the flow of the training down before I actually start breaking out slide decks and so forth. And the demonstrations I normally keep in VS Code as a text file, normally just a markdown format file where I have, these are the things that I want to accomplish just in generally. This is the shape of the demonstrations. But again, I don't lock it down step by step by step. Number one, it slows me down too much. And two, it reduces my immediacy and spontaneity. I want my training to feel like you and I are together live, working together, as opposed to you knowing that it's pre-recorded. And that notion of storyline, cohesion, and instructional flow is super duper important to me. Let's say I'm developing a course that's going to have 5 modules or 5 lessons. The reason why I work these phases in batches is to help maintain instructional flow. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we've got a course that I'm doing that's going to have 5 or 6 modules. I'm not going to storyboard module 1, then proceed and record and edit and produce module 1, and then storyboard module 2. No, I work in phases and batches. So I'm going to go and develop the slide decks for all of the modules, and I'm going to make sure that module 1 flows naturally into module 2, module 2 flows naturally into module 3, and so forth. And I also include liberal cross-references so that something that we've learned in modules 1 and 2, I will reference in modules 3, 4, 5. You see what I mean? Now, there is a hazard to that approach, and that is, especially with e-learning, I realize I might have some learners come in and start with module 3. I always prefer, and I like to state outright, that I prefer my students to start with module 1 and work sequentially through the lessons because I intentionally build your knowledge as we work cumulatively through the course. But I understand in the YouTube generation that you may come in and start with module 4. So I do keep that in the back of my mind, and I just want to put that out as a yellow flag for you to consider. Now, with conclusions, I'm a strong proponent of not doing that. Well, our objectives are A, B, and C. And then at the end, the objectives that we learned were A, B, and C. I don't like that old-fashioned approach of tell them what you're going to teach them, and then tell them what you taught them. That's a little bit too elementary. I like to have my conclusions add new value. Yes, we're going to bring out themes, but instead of just restating the learning objectives, I try to make genuine takeaway conclusions based on the learnings for that module. That's just something else I want to pass along to you. Phase 5, pretty straightforward. This is where I'm actually doing the production. And again, my main point here is that I work in batches. So I'm going to record my lessons or modules end to end to preserve continuity. And the continuity consistency argument is important from a mechanical standpoint. That is to say, I have my recording studio set up here in my office, and if I'm going to record a course this week, I'm going to have just about guaranteed identical production values across all of those videos. Now, if I'm recording module 1 here in my office and then I have to travel somewhere and I've got my travel rig that I'm going to complete the course recording with, it's going to be much more difficult to get a nice, uniform, identical production value if I'm recording these modules at separate times and even worse, on separate hardware. You see what I mean? So that notion of batching just works for me big time. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but it really does work for me. I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson that I divide post-production, editing, into 2 separate stages. In what I call stage A, I'm just doing basic surgery. I'm going to get into this specifically in later videos. I don't want to get too into the weeds. But this is where I do maybe some effects processing and noise reduction. I like to remove breathing noises as much as possible. And again, I know that's a separate discussion we can have about the relative pros and cons of breath noises. But the point I want to say here is that I'm doing a batch work on all of my module videos. And I'm using the same post-production processes on all of the clips to preserve continuity. And that kind of comes back to haunt us in phase 10, revise. Because when you're coming back weeks, months, or maybe years after your original recording to patch in a fix or to patch in some new additional content, It's important to me that that patched content isn't obvious. We don't want the learner to actually recognize, oh, I can hear that Tim has punched this in. That's absolutely not what I want to have happen. Stage B is where I actually do the playback and the editing. Stage A, for me, is just mechanical, getting the clip in a position to be edited. And then when I use the word edit, this is when I actually listen and watch the recording. And this is where I'm looking to do a couple things, to aggressively cut out anything unnecessary. I pride myself in delivering lessons that are super dense. I don't want to get off track in any way, shape, or form. Yes, sometimes I'll inject a little humor, and that again is a yellow flag because one of my recent lessons now is recognizing too late that when I make pop culture references based on my culture, that doesn't translate around the world. So I've had some students who I really thank so much for letting me know that they felt alienated by that. So that's something I'm really working on, to try to make my training as universal across cultures as possible. So there's that, and there's also the concept of adding value in post-production. I mean, I have the recording. What I did during the recording, I did, but how can I add additional value? Maybe if I'm doing a demo, I see that I'm moving the mouse around a little bit too much. Maybe I'll remove that so that the learner doesn't have their eyes crossing trying to follow my mouse. I may add an overlay to point out something to make it easier for the learner to see. I might put up a text pop-up that points the learner to an external resource. So again, I'm thinking about how can I add as much value as possible to this e-learning course, even relatively late in the editing and production phase. Phase 8 is when I produce and deliver the course. And here it's important, especially if I'm working with a team, that when I hand off my course artifacts, I don't just say, here you go, thanks, but I provide supplemental documentation. Why? This helps avoid confusion, missed expectations, and ultimately wasted time. In other words, I remind my production editor, here's the title of the course, here's where you can find the artifacts, these are the artifacts, and any supplemental information that I think would be helpful. This is just part of being a good steward, but I'm saving myself some work because I don't want to have to come back later and fix an error that we could have squashed easily by communicating clearly on the front end. Phase 9 refers to monitoring the course after it's out in the wild, specifically watching for developments that can affect the content. Now, this is definitely a bane of my existence because I specialize in Microsoft Azure, and the public cloud changes so often, it's almost guaranteed that the user interface or UI is going to change in what I'm teaching within months. And there I have to weigh and evaluate how important is it that I make a patch or just replace the entire course so that it remain fully current. The other thing for me is gracefully receiving feedback. And I'm grateful that I have a good open line of communication with my students around the world, and they feel confident in reaching out to me. However you want to do that is fine, to give me a heads up. Hey, Tim, I noticed a bug or a typo in your course. Hey, Tim, I noticed blah, blah, blah. And this is fine. I gratefully receive this feedback because it then comes into play in phase 10, which is revise. This is where I'm making edits to the course. Now, with Azure, something that can change so dramatically, I will sometimes, probably at least in 33% of the times where my editor at Pluralsight will mention, Tim, I think that this product that you taught in this course has changed a bit. We're going to need to do some updating. And if I see that it's significant, if it's more than, say, a third of the content that's changed, I'll just re-record the whole thing. If I do decide that the course as it exists now primarily is fine, but I do need to splice in some edits, I go for the least intrusive edits I can. Specifically, if I have a module that consists of 10 clips, I do everything I can to avoid having to insert a new clip or change the clip order, because this affects not only me as the instructor, but the production people at the company, and there's just lots that can go wrong in there. Reminds me of the old game Mousetrap, that kind of thing. So I try to be as least intrusive as I can. In other words, what I like to do at Pluralsight anyway, is I'll find the clip in question, and if I can get away with it, I will add an addendum. I will add some new content and patch it in at the end of that existing clip. This means I don't have to change the clip order. I don't have to change any clip titles. I can just inject that new content into the existing clip to satisfy the requirement of having the update there, but also minimizing that mousetrap of production issues that can go wrong with that patching process. Alrighty, I want to thank you so much for your participation. I hope you derived a lot of benefit from this lesson. I've refined this process over the last 20 plus years. I'm just overjoyed to be able to turn around and share this process with you. Let me know in the comments if you would benefit from a case study example. I actually do have an idea for a short course that I was going to make anyway in all likelihood, but I thought maybe I could break it out and cover each of these phases in a separate video where I walk you through actually creating an e-learning course. So let me know. You can find me on Twitter at TechTrainerTim. You obviously know where I am at YouTube because you're here. My personal website is techtrainertim.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again and take care.